So in item B, I'm going to show you a process to not only figure out how to generate the list of possible causes, but finally isolate it to the most probable cause. Anybody know who Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was? Okay. He wrote Sherlock Holmes, among other things. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a master logician. He was a very bright guy, and that's one of the fascinations with the Sherlock Holmes story. Now, Sherlock Holmes was a practitioner of what is called inductive reasoning, as opposed to deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning in our modern law system is often called the smoking gun theory. For example, Susan, you and Harley are in a room. It's locked, the windows are locked, it's snowing outside. We hear a gunshot, we knock the door down. Harley is dead from a gunshot wound. You have the gun in your hand, it's smoking, and a bullet that came out of that gun did Harley in. You're in deep tapioca, okay? That's a smoking gun. It's very easy to deduct that this, therefore this, you're in trouble. New scenario. You guys are in a locked room, gun goes off, we knock the door down, and we find Harley deceased of a gunshot wound, but you're not in that room. Worse yet, in the building, you're in the building, Tim's in the building, Jim's in the building, Nancy's in the building, but we don't have a smoking gun in any one of them. There's no footprints around, no helicopter noise, and the weapon's missing, and it was not a self-inflicted wound. One of you did it, that's easy to deduct. If we figure out which one of you did it, that's inductive reasoning. Now, how can we figure out which one of you did it? It is less that you did it than figuring out that you couldn't have done it. For example, at the moment of the gunshot wound, Tim is 5 miles away at a pay booth calling home, and the operator has the time on his phone message. So unless he had a very powerful telescopic sight and go around trees and stuff, so you didn't do it. That puts the three of you in greater jeopardy. If we can eliminate you two, then Susan, you're in trouble. Now that won't hold up in a court of law, but we are not trying to be lawyers and prosecute somebody. We're trying to solve business problems most often, or personal problems. So let me remind you of a funny thing that happened at the end of each one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. You remember all of a sudden we said, Tim couldn't do it, and Jim, you couldn't have done it because you were, and you're blind, Nancy, so you could have never, and therefore, Susan, it must have been you. At this point, Susan whips out her gun and says, yes, and I'd do it again, I hated him. And she jumps out the window onto a horse and runs into the woods. And Sherlock Holmes says, don't worry, we'll catch her. Well, the important thing is that you had a breakdown. Perry Mason did it too. You remember his stuff? Most of his stuff was highly inductive reasoning. It was very, and it relied on the person on the stand saying, yes, yes, I did it, I'm glad. Without that little scene, they could have said, speculate all you want, turkey. Won't hold up in court. That's the process we want to learn, and we'll learn it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. The inductive reasoning process requires a probing. The probing process is usually locked into 6 important questions. For those of you that were impressed with both of our role players here in their probing capabilities, this is a good formula for adding to your sales probing issues. Since we're looking for a defect and the cause of it, we might ask ourselves the question, where in the world does the defect manifest itself? For example, Nancy, you remember the photomat case. You said, we ought to look for cause. We ought to find out how many cities it's in, what time. Remember all those things? And I said, you're right on. If that had been done, well, if they would have said, stop, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that the object is the film, the defect is this unwanted lightning flash, then the question becomes what causes it? If they would have said things like, well, where in the world does it happen? They could have said things like, Well, in Chicago, only out of this one processing plant, off of all 4 machines, it would have saved them doing all kinds of stupid things. Where on the object does the defect manifest itself? Now, sometimes you're not always going to be able to get good answers to these questions. This is a formula for probing. This is the inductive reasoning process that will give you your possible causes. When clock, for example, if I had said to a room of people like this, well, the problem manifests itself mainly at 10 o'clock, noon, and 3 o'clock, you know, that would have been a hell of a clue. What's going on then? Well, coffee breaks, lunchtime. And it would have just narrowed the focus enormously. In my experience, the clock and the calendar are 2 reoccurring big-time clue issues. These next 2 are inextricably interwoven, trend and extent. Usually what you want to know is, to what extent is the defect manifesting itself? For example, Harley, you, Susan, and I are away on a skiing trip, and we're in a mountain chalet. And Susan comes out and says, well, Harley's real sick. I said, what's wrong, Susan? So I'm asking for extent. She said, well, he has 104 temperature. Well, on a chart, 104 fits right there. By itself, that's a valuable piece of information. I know that's higher than it should be. What's really important to me for short-term decision-making is, Susan, what was it an hour ago? If he says, well, it was 101, then I see the trends like this. That's serious. If he says, well, it's 109, which is probably not possible, he would have been dead by then, but you get the point. Yeah, he's cooling off. Or it was the same. All of those trend issues enhance the information of extent. For example, you might have asked me, to what extent does this defect show up on this film? I would have said, oh, about 10 or 12% of all the film coming out of the machine. Well, that's different than 100%. What's the trend? The same. Meaning the problem's not getting worse and it's not getting better. Saying one thing again out of my experience is things rarely fix themselves and I don't know why, just the cosmic rule. So what you want to do is generate a series of questions in the investigative mode so you can write this list of possible causes. Now be careful, the word is possible causes. One of your jobs is to make that list as long as possible. Don't do the problem-solving process ahead of time. Some of you that are intuitives will sit there and say, well, that couldn't be it. That's not your assignment in step 2. Your assignment in step 2 is make the list as long as possible. Then I'll show you a trick using the same inductive reasoning technique to get that list down to the most probable causes. Item C says various possible solutions. Check one. Next to that, make this note. Adverse consequence study will help your decision. For example, it's the microwaves at break and coffee. Solution, one possible one, unplug them. Adverse consequence, we just spent a ton of money fixing the lunchroom. The employees wanted the microwave, so now we take them offline. There's going to be a morale problem. Isn't there a better solution? Yeah. Why don't we keep the microwaves? Let's just bring in a dedicated line so that it doesn't backfeed to the system. What's the adverse consequence of that? $250. Well, we can measure that. It's okay to spend $250 more to solve the problem. So best solutions are not always measurable in some analytical way. They're only measured in terms of what you're willing to pay for them. There happens to be another thing we roll into this. Jim, Nancy, and Greg, you 3 are pretty smart people, and you are on a problem-solving team. And Jim, you are the smartest guy in the group. Your solution that you come up with is 99% pure. Nancy, you're a pretty smart lady, but your solution is 92%, which is not as good as 99%. Greg, you get a 92% solution too. Next question. Which one of you 3 has to implement the solution? And Jim, we find out you're the boss. Probably it's going to be Nancy going to do this. If 92% is acceptable, you're better off sometimes to go with her less than perfect solution because of ownership. So when you get to the solution stage, there's a little thing of psycho-cybernetics. This is my idea, I own it, it's my baby, I'll make sure it stays alive. So be careful that you don't get didactic and say, this is the best solution, do it. Also, there's a cost-value equation. Sometimes doing a 97% solution will cost you X. A 99% solution will cost you X to the 10th power. That extra 2% is out of line in terms of its cost to you. The fourth step we added, it's now that you have solved the problem, so let's see if you can solve the solution. And that's really the recommendation, solution adopted, set up your goals, your plan of action, feature benefit. A good example of that is, I have a make-believe story in my head. 3 guys are sitting around a lunchroom. Robin, you're one of them. You say, hey, you heard a new company policy starting Monday. Clark says, no, what is it? You say, well, starting Monday, the plant's not going to start at 7 o'clock. Some departments are going to start at 7, some at 7:15, some at 7:30, some at 7:45. Michelle's sitting there with you and says, why is that? And you say, well, because at 3 o'clock when the plant breaks, you have all these cars trying to get out in the traffic. It's a pain in the neck. So by starting at 7, 7:15, we're going to quit at 3, 3:15, have an orderly exodus to the highway. Michelle said, boy, that's a good idea. And Clark says, I told those jerks to do that 3 years ago. The dummies wouldn't listen. Well, now we have an interesting example of somebody who might have a great solution, great problem-solving capabilities, and they're sitting in their drawers, and nobody's doing them. So the real payoff on good problem-solving is, can you get people to act on it? So there comes your selling capability again. Not only do you have to sell them you got a problem that's worthy of effort to solve, help them solve the problem, but sell them your solution. Okay, that's the theory behind the process. Now that's tell, show, now let me do the do part, all right?